Arrogance is a dangerous blindfold for men who have grown accustomed to absolute power. When a corrupt and seemingly untouchable police chief publicly humiliated a quiet, brilliant black attorney at a rain-soaked crime scene, he assumed he was simply crushing another powerless civilian beneath his authority. He had no idea that he was digging his own grave. Worse still, he was insulting the very woman who had been appointed to become his new superior. Rain poured over the affluent municipality of Oak Ridge, Georgia, a wealthy community north of Atlanta. Flashing red and blue lights fractured the darkness, casting violent, irregular colors across the wet pavement of Elm Street. The scene of a burglary that had turned into a homicide was already crowded with uniformed officers. At the center of the chaos stood Chief of Police Conrad Voss. Voss was a longtime veteran of the department who ruled it like a feudal lord. He had a thick neck, a barrel-shaped chest, and an ego that had long since grown beyond the boundaries of his small, wealthy city. Under his leadership, the Oak Ridge Police Department had faced numerous civil rights lawsuits, complaints of excessive force, and repeated allegations of corruption. Yet, through political intimidation and a powerful old boys network that extended deep into the state government, Voss had always escaped without consequences. He believed he was completely untouchable. The victim was a prominent local businessman, so Voss had personally appeared at the scene. He moved around barking orders, smoking a cigar beneath a forensic tent, and disregarding nearly every standard crime scene preservation procedure. With grim satisfaction, he watched his detectives walk across the muddy lawn without protective shoe coverings, accidentally pressing possible evidence deeper into the earth. From the shadows beyond the police perimeter, a lone figure approached the yellow crime scene tape. Adrienne Brooks stepped beneath it with quiet, deliberate grace. She wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit beneath a beige trench coat and carried a leather briefcase. A brilliant former federal prosecutor from Chicago, Adrienne had built her career by dismantling corrupt organizations. She possessed a terrifying calmness, an intellect as precise as a surgeon's blade, and a deeply rooted intolerance for incompetence. She paused near the edge of the driveway. Her dark eyes moved carefully across the scene, immediately identifying several serious procedural violations. Adrienne removed a small black notebook from the pocket of her trench coat and began writing. "Hey, you!" The shout cut through the sound of the rain. Chief Voss marched angrily across the wet grass, his face flushed. He pointed a thick, accusing finger at Adrienne. "Who the hell allowed you back here?" Adrienne did not flinch. She calmly finished writing the sentence in her notebook before looking up and adjusting the wire-framed glasses resting on the bridge of her nose. "I allowed myself in, Chief Voss." Voss stopped a short distance away and looked her up and down. His eyes narrowed with a poisonous mixture of racism and misogyny. To him, the black woman standing calmly in the rain did not resemble authority. She looked like an inconvenience. "Are you deaf?" he demanded. "This is an active crime scene. We don't need the local press, we don't need the neighborhood watch, and we certainly don't need whichever community activist organization you represent tracking mud across our boots." He pointed toward the perimeter. "Get out!" "I am not a community activist, Chief," Adrienne replied. Her voice was steady and carried a quiet rhythm that forced others to pay attention. "And I strongly recommend that you instruct your officers to move away from the entry point." She glanced toward one of the detectives. "That officer just stepped on a piece of shattered window glass that has not yet been photographed." Voss released a harsh, barking laugh. Several officers looked toward him. Among them was Officer Nolan Pike, an aggressive patrolman with a long history of disciplinary problems. Pike smirked and moved closer to support his chief. "Oh, I understand now," Voss sneered. He stepped aggressively into Adrienne's space, attempting to intimidate her with his size. "You're one of those defense attorneys, maybe a paralegal from the public defender's office." His cigar remained clenched between his teeth. "You came here searching for some technical loophole for whichever street criminal broke into this house." "I am an attorney," Adrienne replied evenly, refusing to move. "But I am not here on behalf of the defense." "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Voss growled. "Get behind that tape before I arrest you for obstruction of justice." He turned his head. "Pike." Officer Pike stepped forward with an unpleasant grin. "Yes, Chief? Remove this woman from my crime scene." Voss looked directly at Adrienne. "If she resists, put her in handcuffs." Pike reached out and seized Adrienne by the upper arm. His fingers pressed deeply into the fabric of her trench coat. Adrienne looked down at his hand. Then she slowly raised her eyes toward his face. The freezing intensity of her expression caused Pike to hesitate. "Remove your hand from me, officer," she said. It was not a request. It was a perfectly delivered warning. "That is the only warning you will receive." Pike scoffed, but his grip loosened almost instinctively. He looked toward Voss for guidance. Voss stepped closer until his face was only inches from Adrienne's. "You think you can enter my city, walk onto my crime scene, and start issuing orders?" He gestured toward her notebook. "Write this down, sweetheart." Voss tapped his chest directly above his badge. Chief Conrad Voss, badge number 01. He smiled coldly. I run this city, I run this department, and I eat lawyers like you for breakfast. His expression hardened. Now get off my street before you spend the night inside a concrete cell. Adrienne stepped backward smoothly, freeing herself completely from Pike's grip. She looked first at Voss and then at Pike. Deliberately, she clicked her pen and opened her notebook. Badge 01, she repeated quietly. Then she wrote again. And Officer Nolan Pike. Adrienne closed the notebook. Thank you, I have seen everything I needed to see. Yes, that's what I thought, Voss mocked loudly. He made certain the surrounding officers could hear him. Take your little notebook and run back to Atlanta. Make sure you spell my name correctly when you file your complaint. Adrienne turned and walked away. She slipped beneath the crime scene tape without looking back. As she headed toward her sedan parked farther down the street, laughter rose from the officers behind her. Adrienne entered the driver's seat, started the engine, and called someone through the dashboard system. Governor, she said when the call connected, it is exactly as bad as you described. Their incompetence is matched only by their arrogance. I warned you, Adrienne, the voice on the other end replied with a weird sigh. Oak Ridge has been a liability for the state for years. Do what you have to do. Oh, I will, Adrienne answered as she shifted the car into drive. I will see them soon. At the Oak Ridge Police Department, operations continued as usual. Chief Conrad Voss sat inside his spacious corner office with his feet resting on a mahogany desk and a cup of black coffee in his hand. He was in a terrible mood. The homicide had already become a public relations disaster, and his detectives had recovered almost no useful forensic evidence, largely because they had contaminated the scene. Detective Victor Crane knocked against the open office door and leaned against the frame. Morning, Chief. The mayor's office called to remind you about the meeting at City Hall. Voss rolled his eyes and groaned. Don't remind me, this new public safety director nonsense. Following a devastating Department of Justice audit that threatened the city's law enforcement funding, state lawmakers had intervened. They forced the Oak Ridge City Council to create an independent position known as Director of Public Safety. The role carried unprecedented executive authority. The director was not merely an advisor, the director was the department's supervisor. Whoever occupied the position possessed the power to audit, suspend, dismiss, and restructure the police department from its highest levels downward. The police chief would now answer directly to the director. Voss refused to accept that reality. He had deliberately skipped the public announcement introducing the new director. He had also ignored the briefing file sitting unopened on his desk. In his mind, the director was merely another political bureaucrat whom he could intimidate, manipulate, and eventually force from office, just as he had done to previous internal affairs investigators. You're going to behave yourself, Chief, Crane said with a chuckle. I'm going to establish the hierarchy, Voss sneered as he reached for his uniform hat. These state bureaucrats come here believing they can tell real police officers how to do their jobs. He rose from his chair. I'll give the new director the same treatment I gave that loudmouth paralegal at the crime scene. Voss smiled proudly. Put people in their place immediately and they stay there. I heard about that. Crane laughed. Pike said you practically made her cry. She didn't cry, but she nearly ran away, Voss replied. She came looking for a lawsuit and I sent her packing. He placed the hat on his head. That is how you deal with pests. You step on them. Voss eventually swaggered into City Hall. He did not wait in the lobby. Instead, he passed the receptionist and walked directly into the outer office of Mayor Everett Sloan. Mayor Sloan was a weak politician who had surrendered control of the city to Voss and the police union long ago. Voss pushed open the heavy oak doors leading to the conference room. Mayor Sloan was already seated inside, visibly nervous and sweating through his expensive shirt. The city attorney sat beside him. Conrad, Sloan said as he quickly stood, you're late. Traffic, Voss lied effortlessly. He dropped into a chair along the side of the long conference table and leaned backward, locking his fingers across his stomach. So, where's this new state-appointed babysitter? I have a homicide to solve. The director's completing paperwork in the adjoining office, Sloan answered. His voice trembled slightly. Conrad, you need to understand something. The governor signed an emergency mandate. The mayor leaned forward. The director's authority over the police department is greater than mine. You need to show respect. Voss scoffed. Everett, grow a spine. Whoever this person is, they need us more than we need them. He waved dismissively. I will tolerate the meeting, but the moment this person attempts to tell me how to run The heavy mahogany door at the far end of the conference room opened. Voss did not bother straightening his posture. He remained slouched in his chair with a condescending smile, prepared to intimidate the new official. High heels clicked methodically across the hardwood floor. A woman entered the room wearing a sharply tailored navy suit. In one hand, she carried a thick manila folder. In the other, she held a small and painfully familiar black notebook. Voss's mind froze. The smirk on his face stopped moving, replaced by sudden and overwhelming confusion. It was her, the black attorney from the crime scene. The woman he had publicly insulted, threatened with arrest, and allowed one of his officers to assault. Adrienne Brooks walked to the head of the conference table. She did not immediately sit down. Instead, she placed the manila folder on the polished surface, laid the black notebook on top of it, and looked directly at Conrad Voss. The room suddenly seemed much colder. Mayor Sloan cleared his throat nervously. Chief Voss, I would like to introduce Adrienne Brooks. He gestured toward her. She previously served as the state's Deputy Attorney General and has now been appointed Director of Public Safety for the city of Oak Ridge. The blood drained from Voss's face. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. The confidence in his own power, the foundation upon which he had stood for years, collapsed beneath him. Adrienne slowly pulled out the chair and sat at the head of the table. She folded her hands neatly over the notebook and fixed her dark eyes on Voss's pale face. She held his gaze until he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Good morning, Chief Voss, Adrienne said. Her voice was smooth, controlled, and filled with terrifying authority. It is a pleasure to meet you formally. I believe we have already had a brief interaction. Voss stammered. His aggressive persona disappeared instantly. He looked toward the mayor for help, but Sloan was staring at the floor. Director Brooks, I didn't understand who you were. Clearly, Adrienne replied lightly. She picked up the black notebook and opened it. Although I recall telling you that I possessed authorization to enter the scene, I also remember your precise response. She adjusted her glasses. I don't care if you're the Queen of England. Get behind that tape before I lock you up. Adrienne looked directly at him. Have I quoted you accurately, Chief? Voss swallowed hard. His uniform collar suddenly felt like a tightening rope. Director, you have to understand the pressure of that situation. It was a major homicide. We deal with interference constantly. He attempted to steady his voice. I was protecting the integrity of the investigation. The integrity of the investigation, Adrienne repeated. In her voice, the phrase sounded like a death sentence. She opened the manila folder. That is an interesting claim, Chief Voss. She removed several photographs. According to my notes and the images I captured before you ordered your officer to assault me, your detectives were walking across a muddy crime scene without protective equipment. Adrienne placed the photographs on the table. They contaminated footprints near the entry point and ignored damaged glass evidence. She looked up. You call that integrity? Voss was now visibly sweating. Director, we can discuss departmental procedures. We are not here to discuss procedures, Conrad, Adrienne interrupted. She deliberately abandoned his title. We are here to discuss your employment. Absolute silence filled the conference room. The air felt heavy and suffocating as Adrienne placed the black notebook on the mahogany table. Voss stared at the leather-bound book as though it were an explosive device. The arrogant expression that had defined his career was gone. In its place was a pale, twitching mask of panic. Mayor Sloan remained frozen while a drop of cold sweat moved slowly along his temple. He had warned Voss that the new director possessed extraordinary authority, but Voss had been too intoxicated by his own local power to listen. Now the consequences were striking him with devastating force. Adrienne did not raise her voice. She had no reason to. Her presence commanded the room with a quiet and terrifying gravity. She opened the folder and placed a thick stack of documents across the table. You mentioned the integrity of the investigation, Conrad, she said. The intentional omission of his title struck him like a blow. Let us discuss integrity. Adrienne rested one hand on the documents. Before assuming this position, I conducted a confidential audit of the Oak Ridge Police Department. She looked directly at Voss. I did not concentrate on arrest statistics. I examined your evidence lockers, pension fund transfers, and internal affairs dismissals. Voss tightened his grip on the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. You have no authority to investigate my department without union representation, he snapped. His voice trembled as he reached desperately for his usual protections. Sterling Beck controls the police union. He will not allow a state-appointed bureaucrat to destroy my precinct over a muddy footprint. A thin smile touched the corners of Adrienne's mouth. There was no warmth in it. I have already spoken with Mr. Beck, she replied smoothly as she turned a page. I provided him with a preliminary copy of my financial findings. Adrienne lifted one of the documents. More specifically, I gave him the forensic accounting report showing that you diverted more than $400,000 from the union pension fund. She paused. You used the money to quietly settle civil rights lawsuits created by officers you personally selected. All color vanished from Voss's face. His mouth opened, but his voice failed him. Mr. Beck became remarkably cooperative when he discovered that you had stolen from his own retirement fund, Adrienne continued. Her dark eyes remained fixed on him. He assured me that the union will not challenge any disciplinary action I take. She closed the document. In fact, the union is opening its own criminal investigation into your administration. Every protection Voss had constructed throughout his career was being systematically destroyed by the woman he had threatened to imprison. He looked desperately toward the mayor. Everett, are you going to allow this? I know where the bodies are buried in the city. I know about the zoning payments. Mayor Sloan shrank deeper into his leather chair and avoided Voss's eyes. Conrad, please cooperate. This is completely beyond my control. You arranged this, Voss said, turning his anger toward Adrienne. The realization spread across his face. The burglary. You deliberately came to that crime scene because you knew I would be there. He pointed at her. You provoked me. Adrienne leaned slightly forward and rested her forearms on the table. I did not provoke you, Conrad. Her voice remained calm. A competent police chief would have secured the perimeter, documented the scene, and treated an unfamiliar civilian with professional restraint. Her gaze sharpened. Your arrogance created the trap. She sat back. I merely gave you an opportunity to step into it, and you did so with remarkable enthusiasm. Adrienne opened another section of the folder. Furthermore, the burglary at the Sterling residence was not random. Voss froze. His eyes moved nervously toward the city attorney. Yes, Adrienne said softly, recognizing the panic in his expression. I know about the illegal gambling operation inside that basement. She removed another document. I also know that your department received a percentage of the entrance money in exchange for ignoring it. Voss struggled to breathe. You were not at the crime scene to solve the murder, Adrienne continued. You were there to make certain your detectives removed the financial ledgers before state investigators arrived. She slid a glossy photograph across the table. It showed a ledger resting on a blood-stained desk. Unfortunately for you, I had already obtained a federal warrant authorizing investigators to copy everything inside that safe. Adrienne's voice remained quiet. We have the ledger. We have the names. Voss felt his chest tighten. The room appeared to spin around him. His corrupt empire was collapsing with surgical precision. Adrienne rose from her chair. Give me your badge and service weapon, she commanded. Voss hesitated. His right hand moved instinctively toward the gold shield attached to his chest. The badge represented his identity, his immunity, and his control over the city. Surrendering it meant losing the protection that had shielded him from the consequences of his actions. If I leave, Voss threatened weakly, the entire department will walk out. You'll have a strike. Let them leave, Adrienne replied. Her voice dropped into a deadly calm. I have state troopers stationed outside the city and waiting for my order. She stared directly at him. If your officers abandon their assignments, they will be dismissed for cause, stripped of their pensions, and replaced. Adrienne gestured toward the documents on the table. The state has been waiting for a legitimate reason to dissolve this corrupt department. Her expression remained cold. You delivered that reason on a silver platter. With trembling fingers, Conrad Voss unpinned the gold badge from his uniform. He placed it on the table. The metallic sound echoed loudly through the silent room. Next, he removed the heavy black handgun and placed it beside the shield. Adrienne nodded toward the oak doors. Two tall, broad-shouldered men wearing dark, tailored suits entered the conference room. They were investigators from the State Attorney General's Anti-Corruption Task Force. Gentlemen, Adrienne instructed, without taking her eyes from the disgraced chief, escort Mr. Voss to his vehicle. She closed the folder. He is suspended indefinitely without pay while awaiting criminal indictment. The investigator seized Voss by the arms. Before they removed him, he turned toward Adrian. "This is not over. I will fight this in court. I will drag your name through the mud." "You are welcome to try," Adrian replied softly. "But you should understand that while we have been conducting this meeting, federal agents have executed a warrant at your private residence." Voss stared at her. "They are currently seizing your offshore banking records and the hidden lockbox behind the drywall in your basement." His knees nearly collapsed. The hidden lockbox. No one knew about it, not even his former wife. He stared at the brilliant black attorney he had so casually dismissed and finally understood that he had chosen a fight with a hurricane. The cool air struck Voss's face as investigators marched him from City Hall, but he barely noticed. His mind had gone completely blank, shattered by the precision of his downfall. He expected to see his assigned police cruiser waiting outside. It was gone. A taxi stood in its place. The state investigators left him at the curb without saying a word. Then they turned their backs and walked away. The man who had once ruled Oak Ridge with an iron fist was now only a civilian standing alone on the sidewalk. Inside the conference room, Mayor Sloan wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. "Director Brooks," he stammered, his voice filled with fear, "I swear I knew nothing about the extortion operation. I only wanted to keep the city quiet." Adrian closed her briefcase and slipped the black notebook into her pocket. "Willful ignorance is not a legal defense, Mayor Sloan." Her gaze held him in place. "The extent of your cooperation will determine whether you complete your term inside this office or inside a federal prison." Adrian tilted her head slightly. "Do we understand each other?" The mayor nodded frantically. "Excellent," she replied. "Now I have a police department to restructure." Adrian drove directly to the Oak Ridge Police Department. News of Voss's humiliating suspension had already spread through the building like wildfire. She walked through the glass entrance doors, accompanied by 4 armed state troopers. The busy bullpen fell completely silent. Dozens of officers stopped working and stared at the woman who had just removed the head of their command structure. Adrian walked to the center of the room. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the linoleum floor, sounding like a measured clock of justice. She scanned the desks until she found a familiar face. Officer Nolan Pike sat at his computer. His face was pale and sweat had formed above his upper lip. He clearly remembered grabbing Adrian's arm at the crime scene. He remembered the cold warning in her eyes when she ordered him to release her. Adrian stopped directly in front of his desk. Her expression revealed nothing. "Officer Pike," she said clearly enough for everyone in the bullpen to hear. "Stand up." She held his gaze. "Step away from the desk and place your hands behind your back." Pike swallowed hard. His eyes moved desperately across the room as he searched for support from the other officers. No one moved. No one spoke. Their leader had fallen, and they were terrified. "On what charges?" Pike asked weakly as he slowly stood. His voice cracked. "Felony assault against a state official, evidence tampering, and perjury," Adrian answered effortlessly. "And those charges relate only to your conduct at the crime scene." She stepped closer. "My office will also reopen the excessive force complaints your former chief illegally buried." Adrian's voice became final. "Turn around." The state troopers moved forward and seized Pike by the arms. Heavy steel handcuffs snapped around his wrists. The sharp metallic clicks echoed across the precinct, announcing the end of an era of protected corruption. Adrian turned her back on the arrested officer and faced the stunned men and women surrounding her. She stood perfectly straight and commanded the room with absolute authority. "Let me make something unmistakably clear to every person wearing that badge," she announced. Her voice rang across the silent bullpen. "The era of the Oak Ridge Old Boys Network is over." She allowed the words to settle. "From this point forward, this department will operate strictly according to the law." Adrian's gaze moved across the officers. "There will be no more hidden complaints. There will be no more disappearing evidence, and there will be no more disrespect toward the citizens you swore to protect." She paused. "If you cannot meet these standards, place your badge on my desk and resign." Her expression remained unyielding. "I will accept the resignation without further consequences." Adrian's voice hardened. "But should you remain here and violate my policies, you will wear handcuffs exactly like your former colleagues." The silence inside the precinct was deafening. No one reached for a badge. The storm clouds eventually cleared, leaving the streets of Oak Ridge wet, clean, and reflective. Inside the damp, artificially lit basement of the county courthouse, Conrad Voss sat on a hard metal cot inside a concrete holding cell. He was no longer Chief Voss. His uniform was gone. He wore an oversized, uncomfortable orange jumpsuit and stared blankly at the gray cinder block wall. The bitter taste of complete defeat filled his mouth. He had lost everything. His pension, his freedom, his reputation, his power. The steel door at the end of the cell block corridor opened with a loud crash. The sound echoed harshly against the concrete walls. The slow, deliberate clicking of high heels moved through the hallway. Each step became louder and clearer. Voss lifted his heavy head. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with exhausted anger. Adrienne Brooks stood calmly beyond the iron bars. She wore the same sharp charcoal suit she had worn at the crime scene and appeared completely unaffected by the events that had destroyed his empire. Her leather briefcase rested in one hand. Voss gripped the cold bars of the cell until his knuckles turned white. "Did you come here to celebrate?" he rasped. His voice sounded rough and broken. Adrienne shook her head slightly. Her expression remained neutral. "I do not celebrate another person's destruction, Conrad." She stepped closer. "I verify results." Adrienne adjusted her wireframe glasses. "I told you at the crime scene that I had already seen everything I needed to see." She looked toward the paperwork outside the cell. "I came only to ensure that your booking documents were completed correctly." "You destroyed my entire life," Voss whispered. All resistance had drained from his voice. "Because of one conversation." Adrienne moved closer to the bars. Her dark eyes pierced the shadows of the holding cell. "No, Conrad," she corrected softly. The finality in her voice echoed down the corridor. "Your corruption destroyed your career. Your prejudice blinded you." She held his gaze. "I was merely the catalyst that accelerated what was already inevitable." Adrienne turned to leave. Before walking beyond the cell block, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "At the crime scene, you told me to get off your street before I spent the night inside a concrete cell," she said. Her voice traveled clearly through the corridor. "It appears that one of us fulfilled that promise." Adrienne turned away. "Good night, Conrad." The sound of her heels gradually disappeared into the distance. Conrad Voss remained completely alone in the suffocating silence of his cell. At last, he understood the true cost of his arrogance. Karma does not always arrive quietly. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit and takes its seat at the head of the conference table. Conrad Voss discovered that arrogance can become the fastest path toward destruction, and that the quiet observer in the room should never be underestimated. If you enjoyed the story of justice, consequences, and a dramatic shift in power, press the like button, share the video with someone who appreciates a satisfying story of karma, and subscribe for more true-to-life drama.